What remains at the forefront for me with your film is this concept of expectations versus reality. That theme is here for the characters throughout the film, but it's also there for the viewers coming into this because you may have certain thoughts about what to expect here. And the reality of it is that your film ended up being something way more profound than I expected. So I'm curious about what that particular theme means to you in the film, if it doesn't take it away from the audience's experience, and what it's like to play with audiences' expectations and deliver something that has a lot on its mind.
Well, thank you for saying that. I really appreciate it. I think it sort of starts with surprise, I'm a fallible human being. And I think, we have to give ourselves the grace and the dignity to acknowledge that. And the more that we acknowledge that and acknowledge that in each other, probably the more we're going to find compassion. And when we judge somebody for their behavior, perhaps a more efficient route is to say, what's the genesis of that behavior? How perhaps has this person been failed early in their life? And is there something that we can do that might catalyze some freedom? Is there something that I've done in my life that I haven't acknowledged that would actually be of benefit even years later to somebody who has been damaged? We talk about generational trauma all the time. So I'm interested and curious about this. I'm curious about it in myself, and I'm curious about it in my children. Mm-hmm. The idea that something that I didn't own in my youth could fall out on the shoulders of my children is a horror film, so yeah. And I think the other part of it is all of this is engined by our disconnect, right? Our devices, and the fact that you can be half in the shadows when you're trying to show somebody who you are. Mm-hmm. And I have, some of my own shame about the way that I kind of threw these devices at my children. And I was like, I hope you figure it out, bye-bye. Right. And I was kind of a Luddite. I was kind of illiterate about it, but so now I hope that we can continue to investigate, what it is that this is solving for. And I thought that this story in this movie was a good way to kind of get into the weeds of looking at some of that.
Yeah. I feel like after watching it, it helps me, or it's just kind of like one of those resets for people, especially parents, as you said, to be like, I want to engage more with my children. I don't, but also there's the humanness of us all where we have hard days, we work, and then there's only so much that we can take in that we want to be like, yes, let's throw the TV on for you and let's distract you a little bit so I can try to collect myself a little bit better. But at the end of it, I feel like if anything, this film shows you that it is important to have that connection and have conversations with your children. So that was the greatest takeaway for me.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, have the conversations with your children and have the conversation with yourself, right? What are you perhaps numbing your intuition? Are there these inconvenient realities that you take a device in your hand because it's screaming at you and you don't really want to hear it? I've certainly, the biggest mistakes I've made in my life have been when I've muted my own intuition. And that's what these things are meant to do. So, maybe if your kid has buried their face into a device, go, well, what is this solving for? And is there anything that I can do to figure out, is there another coping mechanism? Is there something that I can do on behalf of this child? I don't know. I mean, that's, I guess, the provocation.
Yeah. Right. To go back to that expectations versus reality, I think the scene that I feel best explores this concept, it happens very early on, so I'm not going to be giving anything away, but it's when Anna's on the phone with Eric and he brings up them meeting face to face. Like they've talked on the phone for a bit, so why not? But I feel like you do such a great job and Grace of showing that Anna is really enjoying what this is at the moment, and when there's so much promise and possibilities, and once they meet, it's like all sorts of realities can reveal themselves, as they do for Grace. Are you the type that will hang on to what things are, or do you embrace possibilities and the potential of change?
I hope that I'm both. I mean, I think that once she knows that once she meets him in person, then it triggers a life cycle, right?
Right.
But if you suspend things in a kind of disbelief, then you're in control of that timeline. And so I love investigation of truth. That's why I'm a storyteller. I also love the idea that there's the unexpected, there's hope, there's the elusive. There's things that are don't exist yet, that are catalyzed by two events crashing into each other. So that's part of what you hope to achieve when you're making something, when you're creating something, that maybe something new comes out of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess I'm sort of guilty of both.
Yeah, right. Speaking of investigating truth, I feel like something else that really sets your film apart is the character conversations, like, and how challenging they are. Like, they're not obvious. Like, there's certain films that I've seen where characters having dialogue with one another, and I feel like I can see what's ahead of the curve a little bit. But here, like, I feel like the questions that, for example, Anna is asking Eric, I was like, those would be the questions that I would ask too. And so
Right.
I'm just curious about your own excitement with the authenticity of the dialogue.
Scott Organ is the writer, and I love the fact that he has a lot of faith in human beings' ability to express themselves in a way that is accessible, but also smart. He is not somebody that has contempt for the audience. He has great love for the audience, and to be able to have a way to invite them in the full expanse of their experience. So, he tends to have multifaceted characters and want to give them each their dignity. So for me, that's just a wonderful playground. I mean, we all hold multiple truths at once, and it's, infinitely more interesting when characters do as well.
Yeah. How was it kind of finding the truth within like what you do, what you and Bobby Bugowski, who's your cinematographer, like pulling out the truth in the moments? Like, for instance, I'm going to be very careful in dancing around what this is, but I feel like it's a really great moment. And it's when one of the characters, a certain character, says, "You look beautiful," and you do this slow zoom on both of the characters in this particular sequence, and something is clicking with the audience and becomes instantly exciting in the moment because of how you present it. And I feel like that moment almost gets a little poetic by the very end, because there's like a full circle moment with that exact framing of it. And so I'm just curious about, maybe, I don't know if you can really talk about like what you're trying to achieve with that shot, but maybe just kind of developing the visual language of the film and finding the truth.
Well, thank you for your sensitivity, because I do think it's a more enjoyable experience if you don't know everything that's about to come at you. A lot of the work happened in advance, right? We knew that there was a certain calibration of revelations, and we didn't want to get ahead of it, and we also didn't want to lag behind. So understanding that we needed to be able to represent what the experiences of each of those characters in that moment, both as a collective and autonomously. That's the landscape that you start to sketch on a napkin before anybody even hits the set. And Bobby is an incredible master. He loves actors. He's very intuitive as a shooter. He knows when an actor is likely to do something that they didn't do in the previous take. So as a director, that's just gold. That he allows for those things to happen.
Yeah. What is your relationship with poetry? I picked out the poetry and the visual moments and the poetry throughout the film, but there's also, poetry is a big component of the film itself too, with this, especially the relationship between Anna and Eric with Emily Dickinson.
Yeah, when I was a kid, I was obsessed with a poem called "I Heard a Fly Buzz When I Died." And it was about the very final moment of somebody's existence, right? And I thought that the micro of that was so interesting, and it represented the macro. And for me, that's kind of what poetry is. You can drill down on a single cell, and yet it somehow is representative of all of humanity. And that's kind of what you try to do in an hour-and-a-half film, right? You try to achieve these things. I love the fact that many of Scott's lines are very poetic. He has an efficiency and an economy and a love of words, which I think you have to have if you're a poet as well. So it does inform a lot of the ways in which, you know, I think words are important. We tend to not use them anymore. So, you know, I like, you know, having a moment where I can spend time with them.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Another aspect I like is Anna's room with all the scarves and the vinyl records. Like it's interesting to, even if you go back and watch the film, to think about like what it was probably like for Eric to go through it and see what he discovers about her. If I may ask, what did your room look like when you were at that age? What posters were on your wall?
Oh my gosh, there were so many. I mean, I was, you know, sort of a feral child in the 80s in New York. So I was into bands like Einsters and De Neubauten and, you know, noise bands, and also Ella Fitzgerald. And it was a bit of an eclectic, you know, collection of things. And of course, the obligatory poster of like Carrie Ellis on my wall. And, you know, but what I felt for Anna, you know, working with a production designer like Jonas Appington, the metaphor was that it was a nest, and she was in the process of outgrowing her nest, and there was just simply no more room for her to expand. And so we understand that that is the ground in which she would find somebody online and say, oh, there's something else out there. There's another way to be communicated to. There's, you know, there's a different portal of me expressing myself. And so that part of that design in that room was with all of that in mind. Mm-hmm. It's also very kind of playing with the digital and the analog. I mean, a lot of that is handmade. There's a lot of handmade crafts in the house. It's very, you know, it's half dead plants, it's broken pottery, it's the scarves, it's the kind of, you know, woven purses, you know, just playing with some of that dynamic.
Yeah, well, it's clear that you think about film in a very molecular kind of way. So I appreciate that, and I picked up on it. I know we're just about out of time, but I just want to say thank you so much for this conversation. It meant a lot to me, and while it means something entirely different in the film, I'll just say I hope to see you in a little bit. I hope we talk again.
Yes, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time. Thank you.